You're listening to Real Life, No Filter, where raw emotions and real moments take center stage. No masks, no filters. Just honest stories about life, love, and everything in between. Get comfortable. We're about to begin. A little boy sat on a bench, watching the passers-by. There were many of them. Some strolled leisurely, others hurried about their business. The crowd was motley and noisy, filled with all sorts of people. Children flitted among them, held tightly by the hands of adults, their parents, grandparents. Leo had come to the park with his mother, Eleanor. Before this, they had travelled a long time by train, and for him, it was the first such trip. He had never before seen such huge, steaming hot machines, from which emanated a strange but captivating smell. At the station, he was even a little frightened by the unfamiliarity. "What? Are you a girl?" Frank scoffed, noticing how Leo flinched from the train. "Your mother said she gave birth to a boy." Leo couldn't stand this loud, perpetually unshaven, angry man. But his mother, Eleanor, seemed to love him. She hugged him, kissed him, stroked his head, and tried to please him in everything. When Frank first appeared in their small apartment, Leo even liked him at first. He brought a cake, candies, juice, and flowers for Eleanor, and it felt like a holiday. Frank stayed to live with them in their old house with creaky floors and wide window sills. Leo adored his house, so familiar and cozy, with kind neighbours. He didn't understand why the adults called this place an old barracks and said it was time to tear it down. Why? Where? It's so wonderful living here, he once declared to their neighbour Agnes, an elderly woman who often talked to him and treated him to goodies. She laughed until she cried, and then for some reason grew sad and hugged him tightly. Agnes was very kind, and Leo missed her on this trip, although he enjoyed his first adventure. Agnes didn't like Frank either. She called him bad words, whose meaning Leo didn't know, but from the intonation, he understood it was something very bad, and Leo agreed with her. When Frank appeared in their apartment, Eleanor's former friends stopped coming over. Before, they would sit in the kitchen late at night, making noise, arguing, and even fighting, and Leo would hide under the bed, afraid he would get hurt. It was scary and unpleasant, but Frank drove everyone away. For a while, peace reigned in the house. Unfortunately, not for long. Frank turned out to be much worse than Eleanor's friends. He would yell at Eleanor and Leo, was constantly dissatisfied, and demanded complete obedience. And then people started coming to the apartment again, now Frank's friends, just as gloomy and angry. Leo was very afraid of them. He felt they could harm him or Eleanor. Sometimes Frank would kick Leo out of the apartment, saying, "Go take a walk, you're getting on my nerves," and lock the door. Leo would try to explain that it was cold or raining, that he would sit quietly in his room. But Frank was adamant, and Eleanor agreed with him in everything. So he would wander around the empty yard for hours, and he was lucky if Agnes the neighbour met him and took him in. Agnes's apartment was clean and always smelled delicious. Although Leo loved his own house, looking at the bright rooms of the elderly woman, he understood that their apartment was chaotic. Agnes didn't have empty bottles lying around, there was no dust or garbage, and along the walls stood cabinets filled with books. Leo loved looking at the pictures in them, and Agnes even started teaching him to read. Things progressed quickly, and he was already putting letters together into words, feeling it was like magic. But the learning had to be interrupted. "We're leaving here tomorrow," Eleanor announced one day, saying she had already packed their things. "Well, there's not much to pack there anyway," Frank rasped from the next room. And where are we going? Leo asked. To a better life, Eleanor replied vaguely. Somewhere where everything will be completely different. That night, Leo couldn't sleep from excitement. A multitude of thoughts crowded his little head, and anticipation of a miracle settled in his heart. Something special, completely new, was about to happen. The unknown was a little frightening, but the changes still made him happy. In the morning, it was hard to wake Leo up. Get up quickly, or we'll leave, and you'll stay here, Frank barked, watching Eleanor's unsuccessful attempts to rouse her sleepy son. Leo immediately jumped up, understanding that Frank wasn't joking and could really do that. The station greeted Leo with a colourful, alluring crowd. He held tightly onto Eleanor's hand, whose hands were full of bags, and was very afraid of getting lost in this sea of people. Then they went out onto the platform, and before Leo's astonished eyes appeared the train, huge, steaming hot, bright, and menacingly puffing. It was the first time he had seen a real locomotive, which both frightened and fascinated him. "What are you gaping at like an idiot?" Frank roughly nudged the stunned boy. "Let's go," Eleanor agreed and moved towards the train. Inside, it was even better than Leo had imagined. Frank and Eleanor settled on the lower bunks, and he was placed on the upper one. From there, it was very convenient to observe the life of the carriage and the views opening from the window. Leo was silent for several hours, which didn't happen often with him, watching the forests, fields, and villages flash by. The world turned out to be huge and beautiful, and he wanted to walk in those groves and throw stones into the flashing rivers. Leo liked the clatter of the wheels. It was soothing and promised adventures. When it got dark outside and Eleanor told him to go to bed, he lay and listened to this measured sound. It lulled Leo, tired from new impressions, to sleep. In the morning, Leo was awakened by the train's long whistle. At first he didn't understand where he was and was a little scared, but then he remembered everything and smiled. He hung his head down, made sure Eleanor and Frank were sleeping nearby, calmed down, and stared out the window again. The train was speeding through picturesque hilly terrain. The landscapes were mesmerizing, making his tiny heart contract with delight. Leo suddenly felt a strong desire to take his album and pencils and try to draw this beauty. Only he had neither an album nor pencils, all that was left at Agnes's place. It was she who gave him such things, while Eleanor and Frank believed that children shouldn't be spoiled, and a child his age couldn't draw anyway. After some time, the adults woke up. All three of them had a leisurely snack of bread and sausage and drank tea from glasses in metal holders. It was very tasty. Then Leo was ordered to get back onto the upper bunk. "And sit there quietly," Frank warned. "Otherwise, they'll notice you and kick you off. You don't have a ticket. You're riding for free." Leo was frightened by these words and obediently took his place. He liked being on the upper bunk, but his legs were already numb, and he really wanted to walk around the carriage, look at the other passengers, even run a little in the corridor. But Frank made it clear. He couldn't, and Leo didn't even want to imagine what the consequences of disobedience would be. After some time, the train stopped at a crowded station in a big city. "Let's take a walk," Eleanor suddenly suggested. "Let's stretch our legs a bit. The stop is long. We'll have time to get some fresh air." "Perfect place for it," Frank approved. Leo was very happy. Finally, he would go outside. He was curious about this city, what the people and streets were like here. It was good that Frank wasn't coming with them. Leo liked walking with Eleanor, just the two of them, although lately that hadn't happened often. And now, such unexpected joy. At the station, Eleanor bought Leo a delicious pie with jam. He walked, holding her hand tightly, and looked around with curiosity. What a nice place. Passers-by smiled at him. The sun shone brightly from the sky. Sparrows chirped. "I wish we could stay here forever," Leo said dreamily, and Eleanor smiled strangely. Then they came to a park where there were many interesting swings and wonderful slides. In his own city, Leo had never seen such splendor. "Can I?" he asked Eleanor, looking at the bright playground. "Of course." Eleanor nodded, sat down on a bench opposite, and waved her hand, allowing him to go and have fun while she waited. Leo rushed to the playground with all his might. He rode on carousels and swings, went through mazes, bounced on a trampoline, and his delight knew no bounds. How lucky they were that he and Eleanor had come out for a walk in this wonderful city. There were many children around. They laughed and had fun, chasing each other, and Leo joined first one group, then another. Nobody chased him away. On the contrary, they were happy he came, because the more people, the more fun. Finally, Leo felt very tired and missed Eleanor, and he was also hungry. He became curious about how long he had spent on the playground and why he hadn't been called yet. It was time to go back, and Leo ran to the bench where Eleanor had been sitting. But the bench was empty. On the next bench sat two elderly women watching their grandchildren. On the next, a man with a stroller. There were no more benches nearby, and Eleanor wasn't there either. How could this be? Where was Eleanor? What had happened to her? Maybe she had just gone to buy water or a pie and would be back soon, and she would even laugh at him for being such a scaredy cat, as long as she didn't tell Frank, or he would tease him again. Leo sat down next to the elderly women, who paid him no attention, engrossed in conversation. Eleanor had been sitting on this very bench, the one next to them, so she would come back here. How else? Time passed. The elderly women called their grandchildren and left. The other benches also emptied. There were almost no children left on the playground, and it was getting dark. But Leo still sat as if glued to the bench, waiting for Eleanor. He was cold and hungry, and he was very scared. Adults hurried past, and Leo tried to spot a familiar face in the crowd. But deep down, he began to understand. Eleanor wasn't coming. Something terrible, incredible had happened. Maybe she was gone? Or that angry man had come and taken her and ordered him to stay here? Eleanor always obeyed him after all. What should he do? It was so scary, cold, and lonely. And the people no longer seemed as friendly as they had in the morning, and the sun wasn't shining so brightly. Even the playground didn't bring joy. All the swings were empty. He could sit on any he wanted, but he didn't want to at all. And suddenly, Leo caught something familiar in the crowd. No, it wasn't Eleanor. An elderly woman was walking slowly along the road, very similar to his neighbor Agnes, not so much in appearance as in her expression, gait, and manners. Tears somehow welled up in Leo's eyes just then. This woman couldn't be mean. She, like Agnes, would help him, tell him what to do, support him. Leo jumped off the bench and ran up to the stranger with the kind face. He couldn't delay. What if she passed by and got lost in the crowd? "Hello, Auntie," he greeted her first thing. Agnes always said that politeness conquers cities and spoke about the importance of good manners. "Well, hello there, little one." The woman looked surprised, but very kindly. Her eyes were as blue and radiant as Agnes's. This discovery gave Leo confidence. "By any chance, do you know where my mommy is? I'm already very cold, and I want to eat, and she's still not here." A flicker of anxiety crossed the woman's face. She knelt down in front of Leo, so their eyes were at the same level. "Little one, are you lost?" "I don't know, honestly," Leo replied. "But I think it's not me who's lost, but Mommy. I stayed where she left me, but she's nowhere to be found." Agnes lingered at the clinic. Her blood pressure had been fluctuating lately, so she had to go periodically. "Age, what did you expect?" the doctor would say, shrugging, and prescribe more medications and tests. Age. Yes, she wasn't a girl anymore. A whole year since she retired, it still didn't seem real. Agnes had worked as a seamstress all her life. She had worked shifts at a large factory, toiled at private enterprises, and done orders at home. Very difficult times were in the past, when there was barely enough money for bread. She still remembered the despair of those days. It was precisely then that the incident occurred for which she blamed herself her whole life. Sometimes it seemed that her conscience had quieted down, that she had managed to convince herself that there was no other way to act. But then the guilt would return and press down with renewed force. Outwardly, Agnes remained calm and even cheerful, and no one suspected the heavy thoughts churning in her head. She and her husband rarely spoke of what had happened, but Agnes suspected that he too suffered deeply inside. Those were difficult years. Agnes spent all her time at work, toiling 2 shifts, crawling home tired and exhausted. Her legs, back, and hands ached with fatigue. Her eyes watered, and they paid pennies for this labour, and even those were delayed. The director said there was a queue for her job, and it was true. Enterprises were collapsing. People were left without means of subsistence. Agnes understood that she wouldn't find work in the city, so she endured, worked overtime, came in on weekends. And in the small apartment they rented with her husband, their 2-year-old daughter waited for them. Her husband, Arthur, usually managed to pick up little Sophie from kindergarten by the time Agnes returned home. Arthur had recently lost his job. The promising engineer now moonlit in the evenings, sometimes driving a taxi, sometimes helping at a construction site. He hadn't been laid off, but finding a new position proved difficult, and he scraped by with odd jobs. The young couple's parents couldn't help the family. They themselves were barely surviving and were already elderly. Both Agnes and Arthur were late children in their families. The situation was desperate, but Agnes remembered those times even with nostalgia. She and Arthur were young and very much in love, and it seemed that everything would work out. Their adored daughter was nearby, and most importantly, they hadn't yet committed the act for which they now felt guilty. Agnes vividly remembered the day she found out she was pregnant again. Lately, she hadn't been feeling well. At first, she attributed the symptoms to lack of sleep and stress, but then she went to the doctor. "You're pregnant," the doctor delivered the verdict after the examination. "And already 12-13 weeks. Strange that you didn't notice earlier. It's not the first time." Agnes sat stunned. She understood that something was wrong, but explained it by the influence of stress. She wanted to schedule an abortion without hesitation, perfectly remembering how happy she had been about her first pregnancy. Now, she felt only fear, clearly realizing that their family, on the verge of survival, couldn't afford another baby. Somewhere deep down, Agnes desperately wanted to be a mother again, but now it seemed impossible. "An abortion?" the doctor asked wearily, irritation on his face. "Did you hear the term I mentioned? It's too late. You'll have to give birth." Agnes barely made it home. Hammers pounded in her temples, tears welled up in her eyes. Different feelings battled in her soul, from joy to despair, and her thoughts danced wildly. Her subconscious furiously searched for a way out of the situation, but all options seemed terrible or unreliable. Agnes was so engrossed in her thoughts that she started to cross the road on a red light. An indignant car horn brought her back to her senses. She had to pull herself together and share the news with Arthur. Let him decide. Agnes clearly remembered the look of fear and despair on Arthur's face when he learned about the pregnancy. "Well," Arthur said uncertainly, "since it turned out this way, we'll have the baby. What can we do? I think I found a job. I'll work part-time at night. We'll manage somehow." Arthur hugged her, trying to cheer her up, then got ready and slipped out of the house. A freight train was arriving at the station today, and they needed porters. Agnes felt sharp pity for her husband. A brilliant specialist, an outstanding mind who was priceless at his institute, was now a porter and an apprentice. It was a shame. And this child, because of him, both of them would have to work even harder. But then little Sophie whimpered on the floor. Her forehead was hot, and Agnes attended to the child. All other thoughts and problems receded for a while. The second, unwanted pregnancy was very difficult. Agnes often felt unwell, nauseous, dizzy, with dark spots flashing before her eyes. All this affected her work. Firing a pregnant woman is difficult, but the director forced her to write a resignation letter. "I don't need workers like you, constant sick leave, not meeting quotas," he said. "If you don't write it, I'll fire you for professional incompetence, and you won't find work anywhere with such a black mark." There was even less money. Arthur tried very hard, took any odd job, but there was a catastrophic lack of money for living expenses, and now a baby would be arriving soon. Agnes felt nothing for the infant under her heart, considering him a burden who had decided to ruin their lives. She cursed herself for such thoughts, but couldn't help it. And only just before giving birth, when it was time to prepare the baby's layette, Agnes softened a little. She was sure she was expecting a son, and so she sewed him several wonderful blue suits and rompers and stitched diapers. Looking at these tiny things, Agnes felt some warm feelings for the child for the first time. Arthur eagerly awaited his arrival, made plans, even rejoiced, although he was very tired from his jobs. The baby was born on a stormy November night. In between contractions, Agnes heard the wind beating against the windows and the rain drumming. Finally, a wrinkled, crying creature was placed on the exhausted woman's chest. "It's a boy," the midwife said indifferently. Agnes looked at her son and couldn't understand her feelings. She expected to be filled with tenderness, as she was the first time, but now she only thought about how to feed this extra mouth. The baby was taken away, she was sent to a ward, and Agnes sank into sleep with pleasure, physically and emotionally exhausted. In the morning, sad news awaited her. After feeding the babies, the doctor came into the ward and asked Agnes to come to her office. Agnes froze, realizing that something was wrong with her baby. At the appointed time, she walked into the chief doctor's office on stiff legs. It turns out the newborn boy has serious heart and kidney problems. The woman in the white coat smiled wearily. He needs treatment, lifelong treatment. The medications exist, but they are expensive. "We have no money at all," Agnes stammered, turning cold. She hadn't fallen in love at first sight, but this was her son, and the news of his illnesses was a cruel blow. Where could they get the money for expensive medications if they were barely making ends meet? The doctor began to talk about foundations and sponsors who help families in such situations, but they would have to ask, collect documents, knock on every door. "There will be a way out. The main thing is the desire." she assured the shocked mother. It was easy for her to say. She hadn't given birth to a sick child. And then there was the discharge, and a difficult life began with a sick newborn and a capricious 3-year-old in conditions of family financial disaster. The son was given a certain name, chosen by Arthur in honor of his ancestor, who had excellent health. Arthur believed that the name would help the new child become healthy. Agnes didn't object. She didn't want to think about a name herself. The child turned out to be very restless. He cried a lot, slept little, and ate poorly. Sophie, jealous of the new family member, became unruly and constantly whined. Agnes was going crazy from all this, but most importantly, her son's health problems were confirmed. It turned out things were even worse than expected, and the child required lifelong therapy with expensive drugs. Foundations partially paid for the medications, but most of the budget went to treatment. Agnes perfectly understood that her son was not at fault for anything, but she still practically hated this tiny tormentor for all the difficulties he caused. She didn't recognize herself. She had always considered herself kind and merciful. How could a woman who used to not pass by a hungry kitten think such things about her sick son? But you can't command your feelings. Only later did Agnes understand and analyze her state at that time. A difficult pregnancy, working multiple shifts, lack of money, the child's serious diagnoses, lack of help and prospects. All this led to a severe state requiring treatment by a specialist. But who thought about professional psychological support in those difficult times? Just surviving was enough. Anyway, after a year, it became clear. The family could no longer handle a disabled child, neither morally, nor financially, nor physically. Agnes was the first to suggest a way out. "We can't cope with our son," she said to Arthur one evening, looking him in the eyes. "It's obvious he's getting worse. We can't even buy him medicine. We're constantly saving, depriving Sophie, and we still can't cope." "I'm trying." Arthur lowered his eyes, not arguing, understanding that Agnes was telling the truth. "You're trying, I see that. You'll overdo it soon. You're not superhuman. And then we'll be completely lost. This can't go on anymore. We need to do something urgently. I think we should put him in a special institution. There. At least they'll provide him with medication. The treatment of orphaned children is paid for by the state." "In an orphanage? Are you suggesting we give up our son?" Arthur looked at his wife with eyes wide with horror. Unlike her, he clearly felt warm feelings for his son. He talked to him, played with him, smiled, and gave him piggyback rides. Of course, this didn't happen often. Work took up most of his time. "Well, what's the alternative?" Agnes burst out, shouting. "Watch calmly as he slowly fades away before our eyes. Spend all our money on hopeless treatment, depriving Sophie. Should we all starve for his sake?" Arthur didn't answer, but Agnes saw. He was thinking. Intellectually, he understood that a severely ill child was beyond their means, but deciding on such a desperate step was very difficult. In this, Agnes understood him. Their son was already 1 year old. He remarkably resembled his mother in appearance. Large blue eyes, light curls, a slightly upturned nose. An incredibly sweet child, an angel from a postcard, only very thin. Perhaps his appearance would work in his favor, and he would find wealthy parents for whom the cost of treatment was pennies, and he would have a happy, secure life. But they themselves couldn't handle him. It was obvious. Rented housing, lack of stable work. Their son was not a child who could be sent to kindergarten at 2 years old, so his mother could return from maternity leave. He required constant attention and supervision. No employer would agree to continuous sick leave, and it was terrifying to think what would happen to the child without the necessary therapy. They couldn't provide him with adequate treatment. So Agnes saw only one way out. At first, Arthur tried to take control of the situation. He found another part-time job, wasn't home for days on end in the hope of providing for the family. But in the end, he too understood that it was time for decisive action. Agnes clearly remembered that morning when she and Arthur arrived at the orphanage in the neighbouring region. They had arranged with the director in advance. They were expected in her office. They were met by a middle-aged woman with very anxious eyes. Looking at Arthur, who was tenderly holding his son close, she clarified. "Are you sure you've decided? There won't be hysterics, tears, accusations later?" "Yes, we've thought it all through. We have no other option," Agnes replied firmly. She wanted to finish the difficult procedure as quickly as possible. The baby was smiling, happy to be going somewhere with his mom and dad, looking at her trustingly. It was unbearable. "Well, all right," Ms. Davies sighed. "The papers are ready. Read and sign them. The child will be taken now." At these words, Arthur instinctively held his son tighter. Agnes also reached out to the baby but stopped herself. Everything was decided. It would be better this way, for them and for their son. Soon, only the adults remained in the office. A nanny had taken the son away. She managed to cast a judgmental glance at Agnes, but she bore it calmly. Anyone who hadn't been in such a situation had no right to blame them. Well, then life went on as usual. To avoid questions from neighbours, the couple rented another apartment in a remote area. Agnes went back to work, and life seemed to get easier. But the thought of the baby left in the orphanage, of course, couldn't help but torment both parents. Arthur and Agnes tried not to talk about their action, silently stewing in their own experiences. Every day, Agnes found many arguments for. Her son was receiving the necessary treatment. They were raising their older daughter properly, not depriving her. Arthur wasn't breaking his back at several jobs. It was better for everyone this way. And yet, at night, Agnes often couldn't sleep, trying to imagine what her son's life was like in the orphanage. Was he well fed? Was he being hurt? Or maybe a wealthy family had already adopted him. Arthur also worried, tossed and turned without sleep, but remained silent. He tried to lose himself in work. His workshop gradually grew into a large firm, and he became a department head there. Agnes's work also went well, and the economic situation in general changed. The family had money. Over time, they could afford their own apartment, then a car. Now they went to the sea every summer, something they couldn't even dream of before. Sometimes, Agnes thought that if their son had been born now, they wouldn't have even considered giving him up to an orphanage. Now they could buy all the necessary medications and even afford surgery. Apparently, Arthur had similar thoughts, because one day, when Sophie was fast asleep, he decided to have a serious talk. "How old is our son now?" 10 years old. Almost 11, Agnes replied quietly. In all that time, they hadn't often dared to talk about the boy. Sophie didn't even remember that she once had a brother. I've been thinking, maybe we could take him back. Yes, I think about it constantly, but I'm afraid, will he forgive us? Will he understand? And he's probably been adopted long ago. So you're not against it? Relief was reflected on Arthur's face. I've been thinking about it for a long time. I just didn't know how to bring it up. Of course, I'm not against it. This wild feeling of guilt has tormented me all these years. Agnes finally admitted, and felt a sense of relief. Sophie? How do we tell her about this? Right away tomorrow? Let's tell her. Just need to find the words. She'll react in who knows what way. She's a teenager after all. Agnes fell silent, thinking. Sophie often asked for a brother or sister, but after what they had gone through, the couple couldn't even think about another child. And now, at such a sensitive age, their daughter would suddenly learn about her parents' terrible act. How would she react? It was terrifying even to imagine. Let's not tell her anything yet, Agnes decided. First, let's go to the orphanage, find out the situation, meet with our son, and then we'll see. They didn't postpone the trip. The following weekend, the couple got in their car and drove to the neighbouring region along the same road as 10 years ago. They told Sophie they were going to visit Arthur's friend. The orphanage hadn't changed at all, except there were more swings in the yard. The director was the same woman who had dealt with the bewildered couple that terrible day. She recognized them immediately. "I remember you," she stated. "You're the ones who left the boy here. It was about 10 years ago. Your story is atypical and memorable. Usually, children from troubled families come to us. We would like to take our son back." Agnes got straight to the point. "Oh, really?" Confusion was reflected on Ms. Davies's face. "We were living below the poverty line then," Arthur began to explain. "We couldn't provide for the children, and our son needed treatment. That's why we took that step. Now everything has improved, and you decided that the orphanage was just a temporary holding place? A bad situation. You handed him over to the state, then changed your minds and took him back?" Ms. Davies didn't hide her irritation. "You shouldn't judge us without having been in our shoes," Agnes warned. She wanted to say a lot, but restrained herself. It was foolish to anger the director on whom they depended. "You won't be able to take your son back. He's not with us anymore." "Where?" Agnes jumped up. "Where is he now?" "I cannot tell you that," Ms. Davies replied dryly. "And now, please, leave my office." "Why won't you tell us? Is it adoption secrecy? At least give us a hint," Arthur persisted, convinced he would leave with his son. "Leave the premises," the woman repeated in an icy tone. "Otherwise, I'll call security. First they abandon a child, then they demand him back." There was nothing to do. The couple left the office empty-handed. On the porch, a caregiver approached them, a plump, elderly woman with kind, sad eyes and a wrinkled face. "Are you the boy's parents?" she asked with sympathy. "Did you leave him here because you couldn't afford to treat and feed him?" "Yes, we are those villains," Arthur replied. "Why villains? Don't listen to our director. She's mean, a bad person." "Do you know anything about him?" Agnes looked at the caregiver with hope. "Of course I do." The old woman sighed sadly. "And the little boy was just like his mother. The same blue eyes, the same light hair. That's who he got his good looks from." "What happened to him? Where is he?" "I have no good news for you." The caregiver lowered her eyes. "He's not alive. His heart gave out 4 years ago. They didn't make it to the hospital, so the expensive medications didn't help." The ground seemed to disappear from under Agnes's feet. She staggered and almost fell. A pale Arthur barely managed to hold her up. "I thought it would be better for you to know the truth," the caregiver continued. "After all, you're his parents. Otherwise, you would have started searching, hoping, and then you would have found out anyway." "Thank you for the truth," Agnes forced out. "It really is better this way." "How can we live now?" "Yes, I understand. It's difficult," the old woman agreed. "But you have to live. You're not to blame for anything. The little boy was sick. Without treatment, it would have happened even sooner at your place. And here, he had a good life. Everyone loved him. He was very kind and affectionate, and smart, too. The couple drove home in silence. Agnes understood that the caregiver was right. Her son was doomed from birth. But she couldn't help blaming herself for being cowardly then. Even if he had lived a shorter life, he would have been surrounded by loving relatives, not strangers. Agnes understood. This guilt would stay with her forever, and nothing could atone for it. Of course, the couple didn't tell Sophie anything. Their son remained a great secret. They didn't even talk about him and his fate with each other anymore. It was too scary, too difficult. But they couldn't help thinking about him. Not a day went by that Agnes didn't remember her little boy. She secretly prayed for him, lit candles in church, and constantly reproached herself for her faint-heartedness. The realization that nothing could be changed weighed heavily on her. To her surprise, Agnes gradually got used to this life. The feeling of guilt became a part of her personality, without which she no longer conceived of herself. Sophie grew up and went to study in another city, then got a job there and settled in the capital. She was no longer nearby, which saddened her parents. But at the same time, they were proud of Sophie's success and were willing to accept her leaving as long as she was happy. Agnes had recently retired. Arthur was still working. His workshop had turned into a large factory, and he was a department head there. He liked his job, and Agnes suspected that work allowed him to distract himself from sad thoughts. Agnes finally threw herself into homemaking. She had worked all her life, not having enough time for the house, but now their apartment was perfectly tidy, and the table groaned with culinary masterpieces. It turned out that taking care of loved ones was a pleasant pastime, not a chore. True, there weren't enough people to care for. Only Arthur and an unpretentious cat. But Agnes was still happy, dreaming of grandchildren whom Sophie would bring for holidays. The only thing that clouded her measured life, besides the usual thoughts about her son, was her failing health. And now, Agnes was returning from the clinic. She had deliberately chosen the route through the park. She liked it here. Beautiful, crowded, spacious, and so many swings for children. This is where she would bring her grandchildren. The sooner, the better. Agnes even smiled at her dreams of grandchildren. She clearly imagined a boy and a girl, twins. A plaintive, thin voice pulled her out of her sweet reverie. A tiny boy, no more than 3 or 4 years old, was tugging at the sleeve of her coat. Wide blue eyes, an upturned nose, light curls. A real angel from a picture, only very thin. The child remarkably resembled her lost son. Agnes had last seen her son at 1 year old, but she had no doubt. At 3 or 4, he looked exactly like this little one. Her heart painfully contracted. She had to take a deep breath to compose herself. The child spoke again, and his words made Agnes start. The boy clearly needed help. "I'm cold, I'm hungry, and Mommy's still not here." The little one looked bewildered, frightened, watching Agnes with eyes full of hope. Agnes took his hand firmly, and together they slowly walked around the park several times looking for his mother. The boy, who introduced himself by a certain name, diligently looked around, but he didn't see his mother. "Where do you live?" Agnes tried to find out. But the boy was too young to give a precise address. From his confused explanations, Agnes understood that he, his mother, and some man had travelled a long time by train, then gone for a walk. He had played on the playground, and then he discovered his mother was gone and was now afraid that something had happened to her. "Let's go to the station," Agnes decided. "Perhaps your mother has placed an announcement and they are looking for you." Holding the little one's hand tightly, she found the duty booth. The man in uniform assured her that there had been no announcements about a missing child today, no one had been hit by a train, and the day had been quiet in general. "And what should I do with him now?" Agnes asked, bewildered, pointing to the frightened child. "What to do? Children go to the police," the officer on duty replied. "Street kids often hang out at the station, offspring from troubled families, runaways from orphanages. This one definitely didn't run away from an orphanage." "Evil," Agnes replied, irritated by the officer's indifference. Agnes called a taxi and went to the police station with the little one. The child fell asleep sweetly on the way, trustingly resting his head on her lap. Agnes stroked his light curls and was surprised once again by the foundling's resemblance to her son. Or maybe it wasn't a coincidence. What if fate had sent them a chance to atone for their guilt in their old age? The boy had been abandoned, it was obvious, brought from somewhere far away, left on a playground in an unfamiliar city. Agnes didn't even condemn his parents. Who knew what situations could happen? She certainly knew about that. True, the mother had acted thoughtlessly, leaving her son in danger. Who knows who might have found the child? Perhaps the bewildered, desperate woman simply hadn't thought of it. Agnes was sure that only extreme need and despair could have prompted a mother to take such a step. Anyway, the little one was unwanted. Most likely an orphanage awaited him. So maybe take him into their family? Become his parents with Arthur? Or grandparents? Arthur certainly wouldn't object. But of course, no one gave the boy to Agnes. He was taken to a children's hospital for examination, after which an institution awaited him, and his mother was declared missing. At home, Agnes talked Arthur's ear off about the foundling. The following weekend, they went together to visit the little one in the hospital. The boy was genuinely happy to see familiar faces, hugged Agnes as if she were family, and shook hands with Arthur in a businesslike manner. The boy turned out to be talkative, told them about his hospital routine, asked 1,000 questions, and shared his observations. Agnes fell more and more in love with this bright child and saw that the same thing was happening with Arthur. When it was time to say goodbye, the boy hugged them tightly and didn't want to let go. Tears welled up in his eyes. "You're so good, so kind. I'll miss you, like I miss Agnes." "Is that your grandmother?" Agnes seized on the clue. Perhaps there was a relative who cared about the little one. "Our neighbour from the barracks," the boy replied. Agnes sighed in disappointment. Just a neighbour. From then on, Agnes and Arthur often visited the boy, first in the hospital, then in the orphanage. Agnes repeatedly asked the orphanage director to give her the little one into her care. She imagined how good the boy would be in their apartment. They would surround him with care and love, take him for walks, feed him goodies, and read him books. But while the investigation was ongoing, this was out of the question. And then the boy's mother was finally found. She was found in a city by the sea, where she had decided to start a new life. The young orphanage graduate was enjoying her freedom and the sea views. She didn't want a child and easily left him in the park. That's what her partner, a man twice her age, an experienced father of many children, had advised. He suggested that if she put the boy in an orphanage, the mother would have to pay alimony until he was an adult. But this way, he was lost and gone. They even placed a missing person ad, staging the loss at a station almost 1,000 kilometers away from where they abandoned the child. The mother received a real prison sentence for abandoning a child in danger and went to a women's penal colony. There, she wrote an official refusal of her unwanted son. Now, at least, the boy had orphan status. But her partner got off lightly, which Agnes found unfair, as it was he who had instigated the terrible act. But for some reason, the man was not charged with complicity. Agnes and Arthur didn't ponder the serious step for long. Both had long sincerely loved the boy and were happy to welcome him into their family. They discussed adoption plans with Sophie. She was surprised, of course, but had nothing against a little stepbrother. She was even happy. However, the guardianship authorities refused the couple. "Where would you take such a young child?" the woman in glasses explained, looking at the visitors with pity. "Your age isn't right, and your health. We are not allowed to give him away due to your age, even though you have all the conditions for raising him." Agnes and Arthur returned home disappointed. They had already made plans on how to decorate the children's room and what clubs to enroll the boy in. And then this happened. What should they do now? How could they tell the boy that they wouldn't take him home, as they had promised? And why had they given the little one hope prematurely? Why hadn't they gone to the guardianship authorities first? It was very foolish of them. The couple continued to visit the boy in the orphanage, brought gifts and sweets, and walked around the grounds. The little one had become completely family to them. How could they give him up? How could they stop thinking about him? It was impossible. "I need to talk to the boy's mother," Agnes declared to Arthur one day. "Oh, really? Why do you need that?" He was surprised. "Perhaps she will write a statement saying she is giving the child specifically to us." "He is nothing to her," Arthur reminded her. "She refused him and has no right to make decisions." "But maybe I'll learn something else important. I want to help, you understand? When I imagine the boy having to struggle in an orphanage all his life." "I understand. My heart aches too. But I don't see how meeting his mother can help. But I feel like I need to see her." "Suit yourself." Agnes found out the city where the penal colony was located, where the boy's mother was serving her sentence. It was far away. Agnes travelled for 2 days by train to another city. It was the first time she had been in such a gloomy place. Grim staff, grey walls, an oppressive atmosphere. A silent woman in uniform led the visitor to the visiting room after a search. The room resembled a living room. Soon, the boy's mother was brought in. A very young girl, thin, dark-skinned, with angry black eyes. "Who are you?" she asked warily. "I don't know you." Agnes introduced herself and told her how she had found the frightened little one in the park. "Oh, so I'm here because of you," the mother sneered. "If not me, others would have found him," Agnes remarked fairly. "There were Roma wandering nearby. I hoped they would take him. They need little ones to beg for alms, especially since he has a Slavic appearance. People give more to such children." Agnes felt anger boiling up inside her at this shameless girl who wished such a fate upon her son. And how could such a wonderful baby have come from such an unprincipled, selfish mother? Maybe he took after his father? He certainly didn't resemble his mother in appearance. "Where is the boy's real father?" Agnes asked, suppressing her irritation. The child's fate depended on this girl. It wasn't wise to anger her. "Father?" the mother snorted. "He lives somewhere, got married, and I think he had a daughter. Things worked out quickly for him, and yet he swore his love to me, asked me to come back with our son, begged me to let him see him." "Please tell me more." Agnes suddenly lit up with hope. It was unlikely, but what if the father was a normal person who would be happy to have such a son? "What's there to tell?" the mother grumbled and suddenly brightened up. "All right, I'll tell you everything, but not for free." "How much?" Agnes asked. The girl thought about the amount. 5,000, I think, is enough." Agnes tried to hide her relief. All right, she agreed, as if reluctantly, took half the amount from her wallet and handed it to the girl. The rest later. Okay, the mother immediately cheered up. The story isn't original, but it's long. So, as they say, make yourself comfortable and listen. The boy's mother grew up in an orphanage. Her childhood was difficult. Hunger, cruel caregivers, humiliation, even beatings. Agnes wondered to herself how this girl, having gone through such suffering, could condemn her own child to it. Anyway, she grew up, and they gave her a small apartment in a crumbling building. It was her own living space, however poor. She was happy with her freedom and housing, but no one called her to dinner in the canteen anymore. She had to earn her own living, and she didn't like to work. The young, attractive graduate quickly figured out how not to starve and not to break her back. She learned to live off her admirers, of whom there was no shortage. One day, she met a former classmate from college on the street. The blue-eyed, modest blonde guy was in love with her, but didn't dare to confess. The girl amused herself by making the guy blush, and then they accidentally ran into each other in the park. The guy looked better than in college. He had matured and become more confident. It turned out he still had feelings for her. It was strange, but pleasant. The girl took the guy in hand. They started dating. He felt happy, even proposed. But the guy had a drawback: strict parents who controlled their son's life. Of course, they wouldn't have been against such a daughter-in-law, but even if the wedding had taken place, they would have watched his every move. And then carefree partying would have to be forgotten. And the guy himself, handsome, reliable, but very proper and boring. To become his wife meant dedicating herself to family and home life. No, that wasn't for her, at least not yet. So the girl refused the proposal, rudely brushing off the enamored guy, and a couple of weeks later, she realized she was pregnant, and definitely by him. At first, she wanted to have an abortion, but due to inexperience, she delayed, and the hospital refused. What to do? No money, no job, and she didn't want to break her back. A friend advised her to have the baby. Don't miss your chance, she instructed. You'll give birth, and you'll get benefits, and you'll shake money out of the father. The girl thought about it. The prospect seemed good. True, the young future mother didn't imagine what a child was like. It wasn't a doll. She realized that motherhood was a punishment, hard labor, very quickly. The boy was born healthy and calm, according to those around her. But he turned his young mother's life into a nightmare. He constantly cried, demanded food, attention. It was unbearable. At first, the father only helped with money. The mother didn't let him see the baby, probably just out of spite. She liked feeling powerful. But then, when the infant completely wore her out, she needed physical help. The young father happily spent time with the baby, changed diapers, took him for walks, and the mother could rest a little. Then the father started taking their son for overnights. The guy was already living separately from his parents. Officially, he was nobody to the child. In the birth certificate, the mother asked for a dash to be put in the father's name so she could receive benefits. But in fact, it was he who raised the baby from 6 months old to about 2.5 years old. He worked remotely, so he managed to combine work and raising his son. The boy's mother lived the life she had always dreamed of: entertainment, noisy parties, romantic encounters, drinking. She had money. The state paid benefits for the child, whom the father was actually raising. Admirers were generous. Everything was working out wonderfully. She considered it fate's reward for her difficult years in the orphanage. One day, The guardianship authorities showed up at the mother's apartment right in the middle of a party. It turned out the father had decided to officially register his son in his name, planned to do a DNA test, and deprive her of parental rights. He believed it was dangerous for the child to be with such a mother. The girl couldn't allow this. Then goodbye benefits. She had a huge scandal with the father, took her son, and forbade him from coming near them. Otherwise, I'll file a police report. You're nobody to him, a strange man. Let them figure out how you got the child. They'll accuse you and put you in jail, she ranted. Her older friends taught her how to deal with the unhappy father. Transfer money for support. You're obligated, since you're the father, even if unofficial. If you have a conscience, you'll help. But I won't let you see him anymore. The father tried to reconcile. It was clear he had become attached to the boy and loved him. But the mother remained unyielding. She didn't need big problems that she could expect from him. The boy grew up, and there was less trouble with him. He could even be let out into the yard alone for a few hours. The neighbours, however, complained, saying she was a negligent mother for leaving such a little one unsupervised. But their opinion didn't interest her much. A little over a year passed. The boy had almost forgotten his father. The father also no longer reminded her of himself, although he did continue to transfer money for support. One day, the mother learned from mutual acquaintances that the father had gotten married and the young family was expecting an addition. The girl suddenly realized that this news upset her. Her own reaction surprised her. She hadn't thought that the father's personal life mattered to her. And yet, for a long time, she had been sure that he loved her and their son, that he was ready for anything. She could twist the guy around her finger, manipulate him. And then suddenly, this. Well, all right, what now? A new love also appeared in the mother's life. A shift worker. Old enough to be her father, but strong, confident, knowledgeable about life, and with money. With someone like that, she wouldn't be lost. True, the son still interfered with the adults. He needed to be fed, clothed, taken to the clinic. He asked 1,000 questions, demanded attention. A lot of money was spent on him. In short, the man suggested getting rid of the boy. And a suitable opportunity arose. The couple decided to move permanently to a city by the sea. The man had friends or relatives there. It was a long journey. A small boy could easily get lost somewhere along the way. The mother didn't object. Early motherhood weighed on her, and the need to care for her son irritated her. Of course, she could have given him to his father, but then he would have won, and the man advised against it. You'll remain the mother. Alimony debt will accumulate, and you won't be able to pay it off. She didn't want such a fate. Therefore, she didn't put the boy in an orphanage. If she had officially registered him, her details would have remained in the database, and she would have had to transfer money until he was 18. No, thank you. She liked the man's plan much better. Leave her son at a station in one city, and then report him missing at a completely different station. And then no one would find any leads. How wise that plan seemed then. The mother was sure the plan would work. But in the end, it didn't turn out that way. The negligent mother was still found, and now she was here, in the colony, serving her sentence. This was something she and her partner hadn't foreseen. And he turned out to be a jerk, the mother spat out angrily. That man, when they pressed us, he blamed everything on me, and he remained clean. But never mind, I'll get out, and I'll get revenge on that scoundrel. Thank you for your candidness. Agnes thanked her after listening. You truly have a difficult fate. And yet, you have an apartment, You could have a job. It's easy now. The father helped support the baby. I can't understand how you could abandon such a miracle. Well, then take this miracle for yourself, since you're so good, the mother replied irritably. I'm not that good. Agnes shook her head. I made mistakes in my time too, and they won't give me the boy. They say I'm too old. Well, let them. He lives in an orphanage. I grew up there and it was fine. Agnes said goodbye to the boy's mother and left the building. A plan to save the child had already formed in her mind. If she understood correctly, the boy's father was a good, decent person. Agnes knew his name, knew the city he lived in, knew his approximate age, and the place where he had studied with the boy's mother. Finding the man would probably not be difficult. And then she would have to act according to circumstances. But Agnes was absolutely sure that she needed to find the father. Upon returning home, Agnes actively began searching. She started by checking online resources, looking through all of Chloe's friends and friends of friends. There were many men with the right name among them, but none matched the description. Then Agnes placed an advertisement in a local news group, briefly describing the situation. This step produced an unwanted result. Agnes started receiving calls from pranksters who thought it was very funny to pretend to be the father and make her believe a crazy story. At first, Agnes answered each caller with hope. It seemed to her that the boy's father had finally been found, and therefore the child was saved. But soon she was cursing herself for her rash action. Calls sometimes came at the most inconvenient times, interrupted important matters, and made her nervous. In despair, Agnes shared the problem with Sophie when she called to check in. "Mum, why didn't you consult me?" Sophie reproached her. "I didn't want to bother you. You have your hands full. I thought I could handle it myself." "Delete the ad before they completely wear you out. You need to hire a private detective. I'll take care of it." "But that's expensive, isn't it?" "Not as much as you think, but it's reliable." But there was no need to contact detectives because the boy's father called himself. That same evening, Agnes had just deleted the ad when another call came. "I'm calling about your message in our city's chat," a quiet male voice said on the phone. Agnes thought it was another prankster and replied dryly, "I'm listening carefully." "I think you're talking about my son. My name is Daniel. His is Leo. The child's mother didn't let us see each other. They disappeared somewhere not long ago, so everything fits." "What is the boy's mother's name?" Agnes had a control question ready. "Chloe. Please tell me quickly, is my son all right?" "Son." "It seems it really is you," Agnes concluded. "Answer a few more questions so I can be sure. You know, I've had a lot of jokers calling." "Of course. I myself want to understand if it's my boy." "Okay. What does the little one look like? How old is he? Describe his appearance." "He's almost 4 years old. He has big blue eyes, light wavy hair, and a turned-up nose. He's smart for his age, picks everything up, loves strawberry ice cream, adores animals, and constantly asks questions. He's very curious. And he's also quite—" "I understand," Agnes smiled. "You know your son very well, and it seems you love him. So where is he now? I understand the mother isn't with him." "The boy is all right. He needs a lot of help right now," Agnes replied. "Something unpleasant happened to him. It's even scary. And the child is currently in a shelter. He's a wonderful boy. I wanted to take him myself, but the guardianship authorities didn't approve. They said I was too old, and I really wanted to help, so I found you." "You can't even imagine how grateful I am." Daniel's voice trembled with emotion. "I'm coming to your city as soon as possible." Write down my address, Agnes offered. I think we need to meet and talk. Besides, it would be good if we went to see the boy together. He's forgotten you. He was tiny when you took care of him. But he's gotten used to me. He trusts me. Let's go together. Wow! Daniel was surprised. So, you're even aware of such details? I really did take care of the child myself for about 6 months. His mother wasn't interested. I visited his mother and talked to her. Otherwise, I wouldn't have found you. Agnes really wanted to see Daniel before he went to see the boy. It was important for her to be sure that he was a reliable, decent person with whom the child would be happy. So she went to meet Daniel at the station. She recognized him immediately. The young man remarkably resembled the boy. Daniel didn't arrive alone. A little girl, no more than a year old, was sitting in his arms. Probably the boy's sister, just as blue-eyed and fair-haired as her brother. A pretty young woman hurried alongside Daniel. Agnes rushed towards this beautiful family. Noticing the young people from a distance, she understood. The boy would soon be in good hands. If only they would give him to his father. He would be happy with him. What luck that they had been found. Thank you so much for not abandoning our son, for finding us. Daniel looked at Agnes, smiling broadly, and then he introduced his companions. This is my wife, Sarah, and the little one's name is Lily. She's our daughter. But they didn't go to the orphanage right away. They had to wait for visiting hours. Agnes helped the family settle into a local hotel. She offered them to stay at her place, but Sarah flatly refused to inconvenience their hosts. You've done so much for our family, she said. I always dreamed of having many children, and definitely an older boy. It seems that wish will soon come true. You'll really like the boy, Agnes smiled, her chest feeling warm. He's just a wonderful little one. How I've missed him all this time, Daniel confessed. Finally, it was visiting time. The whole company, with Agnes leading the way, sat in the orphanage lobby, waiting for the boy to be brought out. The staff were aware of the situation. Some couldn't hold back tears upon learning that the little one had found a loving father. It was just a matter of paperwork. To take the boy, a pile of documents had to be collected. But they could meet now. Just don't rush to hug him right away, Agnes instructed. Otherwise he'll get scared. It's unlikely he remembers you. I understand. Daniel nodded. Of course, I understand that my son has forgotten me. He was just a baby when his mother took him and forbade me from seeing him. And yet, why didn't you fight for him through court? Agnes asked. After all, it was dangerous for him to stay with his mother. I tried, Daniel replied, lowering his eyes sadly. But I was essentially a stranger to him. And to do a DNA test, you need the consent of the legal representative, which was the mother. As you understand, she didn't give consent. She needed him as a source of income. There are many mothers like that now who live on benefits. Sarah, Daniel's wife, chimed in. And then a rich man appeared, and the realization, there's a man, the need for benefits disappeared, and the child was in the way. Well, that's the result. It's good that everything turned out so well. It could have been worse. It's terrifying to imagine the dangers that threatened a baby abandoned in an unfamiliar city. The young woman's voice trembled. Tears welled up in her eyes, which she tried to hold back. Obviously, she took the situation to heart. Soon, she would be a wonderful mother to the little one, loving, caring, understanding. You are the boy's guardian angel. Daniel smiled, looking at Agnes. I have a child myself. Sarah stroked the hair of her daughter, who had dozed off on her lap while waiting for her older brother. And I don't understand. I just don't understand how someone can do that to a baby. Agnes silently shook her head, agreeing with her. She had tried many times to find excuses for the boy's mother, a poor girl from an orphanage who hadn't received love and care. But her imagination failed her. Perhaps there was simply a type of person, selfish, callous. The boy was very lucky that this man and his wife had now appeared in his life. There couldn't be better parents for the bright little boy. The door to the lobby finally opened. The adults turned their heads as if on command. Standing in the doorway was a caregiver, an elderly woman in a white coat. She smiled kindly and shook hands with everyone. The caregiver was holding a little boy with huge blue eyes by the hand. The little one had been prepared for this meeting. He smiled affectionately at Agnes and looked with interest at the people she had brought. "Well, these are the guests I told you about," the caregiver said to the child. "Go on, meet them." The boy ran up to the adults and looked cheerfully at Sarah and Daniel. They smiled, looking at the charming little boy. "So you are my new friends?" the boy asked seriously. "It's great that you finally came. I've been waiting for you." At this point, Daniel and Sarah, despite the warning, couldn't restrain their emotions. They hugged the boy from both sides, enveloping him in a cocoon of caring hands. The boy stood there, blinking in surprise and smiling. Then, when the emotions had subsided a little, a most fascinating conversation began. As was his custom, the boy showered the visitors with questions. He was interested in the future, asked about the city he would soon move to. It was important for him to know what his room would be like. He also declared that he was simply delighted with the little girl and offered his help in raising her. He importantly announced that he already had experience. In the orphanage, only he knew how to play properly with the youngest ones. The little girl also clearly took a liking to the cheerful boy. She smiled her toothless smile and reached out her chubby hands to him. 2 hours flew by unnoticed. Agnes's heart sang at the sight of this wonderful picture. Everything turned out even better than if she had been allowed to take the boy. Yes, she had become very attached to the little one, but now he would have young parents and a little sister, and most importantly, his real father. No one could replace a blood relative. The city was preparing for the New Year holidays. Garlands decorated the streets, shop windows beckoned with discounts. Agnes decided not to take a taxi, but to walk to Daniel's house. Her bags weren't heavy. She had few things. She arrived. The gifts for all members of the wonderful family pleasantly weighed down her hands. How much pleasure she had taken in choosing them. After that first meeting at the orphanage, the boy didn't stay in the state institution for long. Knowing Daniel's unusual story, everyone went out of their way to help him. The administration, the guardianship authorities, and the orphanage staff. The DNA test was ready in the shortest possible time and confirmed the obvious. The boy was indeed Daniel's son. The other documents were also collected quickly. Then a psychologist worked with the boy, explaining that the little one would now live in a family, that Daniel and Sarah were his parents. The boy quickly accepted Daniel as his father, but he called Sarah Auntie for a long time, although he became attached to her with all his heart. Sarah gave the boy a lot of attention, love, and affection. With her, he literally blossomed, became calmer and more confident. But still, the little one remembered his birth mother and loved her, despite everything. Sarah didn't rush the child and was understanding. And just the other day, a real pre-New Year miracle happened. The boy finally addressed Sarah with the long-awaited word, Mommy, for the first time. It made me feel so warm, so light. She shared her joy with Agnes. They now often talked on the phone. Of course, Agnes kept in touch with these pleasant people. The boy had brought them together, connected them with an invisible thread. The elderly woman was grateful to fate for meeting Daniel and Sarah. Now she had true friends in her life, despite the significant age difference. They were comfortable and happy together. Agnes regretted that the boy's family lived so far away, in another city, and Daniel and Sarah seemed to miss her too, because they constantly invited her to visit. And so Agnes finally got ready, bought gifts, took a train, and arrived. She wouldn't stay for the holiday itself. She would return home. Sophie had promised to visit her parents for New Year and hinted that she wouldn't be alone. Probably she would introduce her fiancé. And from there, grandchildren weren't far off. Soon, very soon, little ones would appear in Agnes's life, in addition to the boy and the little girl who had already become dear to her. The snow crunched loudly underfoot and sparkled beautifully in the light of the street lamps. Here was the right house. They were waiting for her there. The boy would rush to hug her from the doorstep and, of course, immediately shower her with questions. Probably he would ask about the train, about the journey. Agnes was greeted warmly. A laid table awaited in the living room, and the aromas of baking wafted from the kitchen. The evening was warm, heartfelt, and cheerful. Agnes enjoyed talking with Daniel and Sarah, listening to new stories about the little ones. And yes, life with such tiny ones simply couldn't be boring. The young parents looked a little tired, but very happy. Our family became complete thanks to Leo, Sarah admitted. With his arrival, I realized that this was exactly the kind of boy we were missing. Daniel looked at his wife tenderly. It was obvious that he was grateful to her for her attitude towards his son. Yes, Daniel was truly lucky. People like his wife were rare. And then Agnes played with the boy and Lily, built towers, held a tea party for dolls, and spent a long time rocking the children on the indoor swing, enjoying their laughter. And before bedtime, she read the little ones a fairy tale. Both listened with interest to every word, even tiny Lily. She was at an adorable age, trying to imitate everything her brother did, like a little monkey. Then Agnes lay on the sofa in the room assigned to her and smiled. The household members were asleep. The clock ticked in the apartment. Sleepy, quiet, peaceful. Agnes was used to being tormented by thoughts of her lost son before sleep. She tried to imagine his life in the orphanage, without parental love, wondered if he was hurt. All this was terribly burdensome. But now, for some reason, it felt lighter. Memories of the terrible mistake no longer caused such emotional anguish. The boy had somehow miraculously healed old wounds. No, Agnes didn't absolve herself of guilt. She still felt sorry for her son, who had such a difficult fate. But Agnes had finally decided to tell Sophie everything. Sophie, of course, was shocked, simply blinked silently for a while. But Sophie didn't turn away from her parents, as Agnes had imagined. On the contrary, she pitied them, accepted their terrible choice, even supported them. "How do you live with such a heavy burden on your soul?" Sophie whispered, hugging her mother and father. "But you were young, bewildered, and frightened, and no one supported you. My poor dears." Yes, the tragedy with her son would stay with Agnes forever. But now, life was much easier. She had been given a chance to save a child so remarkably similar to her son, and she had done it. Now the boy was in a loving family, and joy and peace reigned in Agnes's soul.